Hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our second Clinician's Choice webinar. Big thank you to Peter Alport for agreeing to do a repeat for us, considering we had such bad load shedding last week. So to the new delegates that registered, thank you very much. I'd like to introduce Peter. Peter's been a dental education consultant for over 35 years. He's traveled to more than 70 countries around the world, educating key opinion leaders, dentists, dental faculties, oral hygienists, and dental assistants, teaching better dentistry and helping dental professionals to improve patient care. Peter's currently the International Sales Manager for Clinician's Choice Products Incorporated. So without further ado, over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Sharon. I appreciate the intro and appreciate the opportunity to address the folks that unfortunately couldn't make it last week. Kind of just run through a PowerPoint, and then I have access to a Epson visualizer, which I will actually just in more detail be able to explain the products to you. So just bear with me a moment as I flip to my PowerPoint here. Okay, so can everybody see that? Sharon?
Yes.
Okay, so you can see it. Okay, perfect. Alrighty. So really what we want to speak to you about this evening is about sectional matrix systems. And I'm going to start by saying I'm not here to talk negatively about competitors. I'm just merely going to point out to you what is different and how we can help you really achieve your goal of creating tight contacts, large broad contacts when doing class 2 restorations. So, really at the end of the day, what is the goal of restorative dentistry? Well, we believe the goal of restorative dentistry is to restore form and function. We know the more we cut on teeth, the more we weaken teeth, the more times we cut on the tooth, the sooner we kill the tooth. And it's not only about maintaining or restoring form and function, but also aesthetics. We know certainly they have made tremendous improvements in tooth-colored restorative materials over the years. Amalgam was a very, very good material for many, many years, but at the end of the day, people want their teeth to look like teeth. And certainly, as I say, with the development in tooth-colored restorative materials, we're certainly able to provide very predictable and consistent results. We know that some restorations are easier to do than others. So typically, a class 1 is almost like cementing a post into the ground, because the benefit is you've got the entire preparation captured in tooth structure. Now, certainly from a composite placement point of view, it's a bit more of a challenge because you have a higher C factor of 5, but the fact that you have the entire preparation surrounded by tooth structure is certainly a benefit. We know that class 2 restorations are certainly more challenging. Well, why? Well, number one, we need something to contain that material until it's completely set. And number two is we need to keep that material separated from the adjacent tooth. So why do we want to create tight proximal contacts? Well, there's primarily 2 reasons. Number one is we want to maintain the dental arch stability by transmitting the forces along the long axis of the teeth. And number 2 is we want protection of the interdental papilla so as to prevent food impaction or tissue trauma. Now, on occasion, this is sometimes what we'll end up seeing on a radiograph, and that's we see this open contact right here. And we all know that open contacts can lead to clinical challenges. Number one, it can lead to tooth dislodgement and or rotation. B, it can lead to defective occlusal contacts. 3, food impaction, and then tissue trauma. So containment, how was it typically done? Well, containment was typically done using a metal matrix band with wooden wedges. And the first matrix systems out there were traditionally a Toffelmeyer or a Sequeland matrix system. But the challenge with these systems is, A, the bands are very flat, so they don't follow the proximal contour of the restoration very well. The bands tend to be quite thick, so sometimes when you remove the band, you tended to break the contact, and that led to an open contact. And sometimes the placement of these retainers could provide a challenge, especially with a patient, say, with a restricted bite. Additionally, if you ask any assistant what one of their least favorite things are to do in the dental office, would be the cleaning and replacing of bands in these retainers. Now, we know when we look at a radiograph, these are typically some of the challenges that we see with a Toffelmeyer type of system. Is number one, it really fails to restore that proximal anatomy. You get a very thin contact at the marginal ridge. Then you have this large open space here, which kind of leads to a large food trap. But collectively, what this leads to is increased likelihood of fracture, occlusal interference, recurrent caries, and periodontal disease.
Peter, sorry to interrupt. I think you've stopped your screen sharing. We can only see you, not your presentation.
Oh, shoot. Hang on. Bear with me a second here. Let me go back here then. Let me go back to the beginning.
The first slide was there when you asked if we could all see it.
Okay, now can you see this slide? Okay, let me just grab my IT gauge.
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we have these little hiccups that we go along with all our webinars lately. While Peter's getting his IT sorted out, I can let you know that we also have another webinar coming up in next week on the Clinician's Choice heat trays, which will be able to save you money, 30% actually, of what you spend on your impression materials. So keep a lookout for that registration.
Enable screen sharing. Share your screen. Share. Open your PowerPoint.
There we go. It looks like something's happening there, Peter.
Okay, just bear with me a second here. Yes.
Yeah, and then start it again.
Okay, can you see it now, Sharon?
There we go. Yes.
Okay. All righty. All right. Well, let's reset the rewind clock, and we'll go again from the beginning. Sorry about that, folks. Thank you for bringing that to my attention, Sharon. Otherwise, I would have done this whole thing, and we would have not. People would have said, "What's this guy talking about?" All righty. So, as I said, really, what is the goal of restorative dentistry? The goal of restorative dentistry is to restore form and function. We know that dentistry today is a lot more conservative, and we know the more we cut on teeth, the more we weaken teeth. The more times we cut on the tooth, the sooner we kill the tooth. But it's not only about restoring form and function, it's also about maintaining aesthetics. And certainly with the improvement in tooth-colored restorative materials, we can really produce very, very lifelike restorations. I mean, as I alluded to a little earlier, amalgam certainly was a very good material many, many years ago, but at the end of the day, I think your patients want their teeth to look like teeth. So we all know that class 1 restoration is relatively easy to do because it's like cementing a post in the ground. The entire preparation is surrounded by intact tooth structure. It's just from a composite placement point of view, it's a little bit more of a challenge because you have a higher C factor. You're actually bonding to 5 walls, and hence that's a bit more of a challenge. So you have to be careful during the placement of your restorative material so as to prevent any post-op sensitivity. And then certainly the class 2 is a bit more of a challenge. Why? Because you need something to contain that material until it's completely set. And then B, you need to get it keep it separated from the adjacent tooth or teeth, if you will. So again, why do we want tight proximal contacts? Well, number one is we want to maintain dental arch stability by transmitting the forces along the long axis of the teeth. And B, we want protection of that interdental papilla so as to prevent food impaction and or tissue trauma. However, this is what happens, or can happen rather, on occasion, is we end up with an open contact. And open contacts can lead to tooth dislodgement and or rotation. It can lead to defective occlusal contacts, food impaction, and then of course tissue trauma to the soft tissue, if you will. So as I was mentioning, containment has been typically been done with a stainless steel matrix band and wooden wedges. And the traditional systems used have either been a Sequiland or a Tophamar system. But the challenge with these systems, A, is number one, the bands tend to be very flat, so they don't provide the ideal proximal contour or anatomy, if you will. They are quite thick, so sometimes, especially when you're removing the band, is you tend to break the contact. And then placement of these retainers can sometimes prove to be a challenge, especially in patients, say, with a restricted bite. And then for the assistant, is probably one of the least enjoyable duties they have in the dental office is cleaning and then replacing the matrix band with a new matrix band. So typically when we look at a Tophamar system on a radiograph, this is sometimes what we see is, number one, is it really doesn't do a good job of restoring that proximal anatomy. Number two, we have a very, very thin contact at the marginal ridge. So if you bite down on something hard, the patient bites down on something hard, say a piece of candy, that can fracture very, very easily. And then you've got this large food trap, which is not a good thing. And collectively, all of these lead to the increased likelihood of fracture, occlusal interference, recurrent caries, and periodontal disease. So we know there are clinical situations where you are not able to use a sectional matrix system. And this is, I would encourage you to take a look at these bands. These are our convexity sectional matrix, little matrix bands, Tophamar matrix bands. And the difference with these bands is they are convex. They come pre-contoured. They come in two different thicknesses. The T band, which is our dead soft band, is 0.025 millimeters, so it makes it very easy to burnish the band. And then our S2 is a stainless steel band, which is a little stiffer. It's a 0.4 millimeters, and this is particularly advantageous if you've got situations where you've got a tight contact. There's less chance of the band deforming. And then we make them in two sizes, either 5.5 millimeter for premolars or 6.3 millimeter for molars. So how do we create a good posterior contact? Well, first of all, we need ideal tooth separation. Number two is we need to know the exact location of the contact point or the contact area. Number three is we need to create that ideal proximal contour. And then most importantly is we need to seal the preparation margins, because typically, where do class 2 restorations fail first? Typically at the floor of the proximal box, you start seeing staining. And that's primarily because of two reasons. Number one, you haven't got a good seal at the gingival margin and you've got sulcular fluid contamination, or the curing light that you're using isn't providing you with sufficient energy to cure that composite. Because we know that most curing lights, when you move as little as 1 centimeter away, you lose about 60 to 80% of the energy of the light. And that's before you've even placed a composite material. So for argument's sake, if you were packing in, say, an A8.35 composite, it would make it even more of a challenge. So typically, what many clinicians do is their very first layer, they use more of an A1 or a B1 shape to make sure that that composite is completely cured, because we know we can most certainly undercure composite, but we cannot really overcure composite. So a little bit of extended curing time is not a bad thing, especially for that first layer, if you will. So as I mentioned, there's certainly multiple systems out there, and I would say probably the most reputable ones out there would be the Garrison system and the Triodent, now referred to as the Paladin system. They are not bad systems, folks, and I'm not here to talk negatively about them. I'm just going to point out to you what's different between these systems and the dual force system, and how we feel we have addressed a number of these clinical challenges. We only work with evidence-based key opinion leaders, and all of our products are independently evaluated before we go to market, so we don't use the market as a guinea pig when we bring new products to market, if you will. So looking at the Garrison system, the challenge with the Garrison system is a very good system, but they use stainless steel rings. And the challenge with stainless steel is hand force to open the ring. So not to sound sexist, for female dentists, it can be a little bit more of a challenge. Any dentists that have had any issues with carpal tunnel syndrome will find that these rings require a lot more force. It's approximately 37% more force is required to open the ring. Now, like in endodontics, there was a reason why people kind of went away from stainless steel to nickel titanium. And the reason why people went away towards nickel titanium is nickel titanium has memory. And really, the goal is to retain the resiliency in these tines. So the challenge with the stainless steel ring is they tend to lose their tension. They tend to fatigue fairly quickly. And if you read any of the marketing done by Garrison, they say that you can use their rings about 300 times, and then you should really be replacing them, if you will. The other challenge that clinicians have commented about these rings is the issue if they get composite or adhesive on the resin part of the ring. They find it extremely frustrating to remove. Many times they have to soak the rings in white vinegar for about 10 minutes and then flick this residual composite or adhesive off that resin part of the ring. Then the challenge with this ring as well, they have a very nice resin layer here, but the challenge is right in the center, they have this hard plastic spine. And the challenge on occasion with this plastic spine is it can deform the matrix band. And now, you have to spend excess time removing excess composite or adhesive flash. And we know now, especially post-COVID, that time is more of the essence than ever before. And we know that your biggest expense besides your staff in your building is time. So we're able to provide you with solutions that can reduce your treatment time, increase your efficiency, and ultimately increase practice profitability. I think that kind of makes sense, if you will. Then we also know that post-COVID, many more clinicians are working under rubber dam. And the challenge with these rings is their profile is too low, meaning that it is near impossible to seat this ring if you have a rubber dam clamp in place. So as I alluded to, certainly the Triodent developed by Simon McDonald in 2008 out of New Zealand was certainly a step in the right direction. Why? Because they went from stainless steel to stamped nickel titanium. So they had these sheets of nickel titanium, and what that is, they stamped the rings out. But here's the issue with these rings is when you look at the shape of the ring, you'll notice that it's U-shaped. It's not round. So the issue is that every time you open the ring, you create stress right over there. And hence the reason why, again, sometimes these rings can break prematurely. Then we have the same concern and the feedback we received from numerous customers, because we do sell the Triodent system here in Canada, is the issue with composite or adhesive from sticking to the ring. And then you'll also notice that this is all a single piece construction. So sometimes it'll adapt well to the buccal surfaces of the restoration, but might not adapt as well to the lingual surfaces of the restoration. And then additionally, we have the same issue with rubber dam clamps. The profile of these rings are much lower. So again, makes it more of a challenge when trying to seat these rings when you do have a rubber dam clamp in place. Then also what the manufacturer does recommend is that from time to time, because of the shape of that ring, that you retension them. And I'll show you how you do that. In the actual, your little forcep, you'll see there's a little slot where the ring is designed to sit. And then I can show you quite easily how you can retension these rings. And as I alluded to, these rings were developed in 2008 by Simon McDonald. And then after a number of years, he sold out to Dentsply. As I say, Dentsply have not changed the ring in any way other than changing the color. But you know, this is 12-year-old technology. And when Triodent sold to Dentsply, that was an immediate red flag for us, and we said we have to develop our own system. So it took us 4 years to develop the dual force system, but we feel that we've overcome many of these challenges, if you will. When we look at the separation force of these rings, they are all fairly similar, but here's the difference, is the Paladent and the Garrison systems rely entirely on their rings for their separation force. So they get in, you know, about 4.5 to 5 pounds is kind of where they're coming in at. The difference with the dual force system is we get 5 pounds of separation force from our ring, but we get an additional 2 pounds of separation force from our wedge. So collectively, we're getting 7 pounds of separation force. And I'm sure you'll all agree with me, the goal is to create the tight contact. So this is where we feel we have some benefit over these other systems. Now, the challenge with traditional wooden wedges is they triangular in shape. So they fill the space, but there's two things that wooden wedges do not do, is they don't provide any separation pressure, and they don't seal the matrix band well on the lingual aspect of the restoration. And this is typically where you get your excess composite or adhesive flash. Additionally, regardless of the size of wedge that you're using with wooden wedges, is you've got to be very careful during placement that you don't tear the interdental papilla and initiate bleeding. So I kind of refer to wooden wedges as dental harpoons, if you will. Now, the other challenge with wooden and traditional plastic wedges is as you go up in size from small to large, the profile of that wedge gets larger as well. So certainly smooth plastic wedges were a step in the right direction. But the challenge with a traditional smooth plastic wedge is, again, they fill that space, they're not providing any separation force, they don't seal the matrix band well on the lingual aspect, and then on occasion, sometimes they can back out of the embrasure area, which can be quite frustrating. So certainly it was quite innovative of Garrison to develop this little wedge where they have a hard plastic core, and then on the outside they have the softer, these softer little plastic fingers, if you will. But again, the challenge with these little fingers is certainly it will help address the issue of the wedge backing out of the embrasure area. But the challenge with these little fingers is they're quite flimsy, and I'll show you when I switch the camera. So they don't really provide any separation force, and they certainly don't do an adequate job of sealing the matrix on the lingual aspect of the restoration. When we look at the matrix bands, typically all matrix bands are approximately the same thickness, about 38 to 40 microns. And this was quite a novel idea by Paladent to put these little holes, or Triodent rather, put these little holes in the matrix band to facilitate placement and removal. The challenge with removal, though, is that these little holes are right very close to the edge of the band. So many times what happens is when you're engaging your little pin tweezer to remove it, the band tended to tear. So what did many of the manufacturers do is they added a Teflon coating to their bands to facilitate, and it was proven in research, to reduce the adhesion of composite or bonding agent to the band by up to 92%. But there was the issue of increased cost. And then my question has always been to clinicians is, if you are lightly burnishing that band, typically what happened to the Teflon coating? Well, on occasion, as you're busy polishing your restoration, you would see a dark speck, which was part of the Teflon coating that had come off the matrix band, and now you'd have to take something like a quarter round or half round carbide burr, remove that, re-etch, re-adhesive, reapply composite, go through the polishing step to fix that little challenge, if you will. And collectively, all of these challenges lead to overhangs and excess time required to remove excess composite adhesive flash. Now, I know these images are a little bit exaggerated, but I just really wanted to kind of make my point about how frustrating it can be now to try go interproximally to remove this excess material. So let's look at the dual force system, and let's look what's different and how this can certainly assist you in reducing some of those potential frustrations. So when we look at the ring, first of all, we use 2-draw night-tie wires. Why 2 wires? Well, the inner wire puts separation force on the mesial contact. The outer wire puts separation force on the distal contact, and now we create even separation pressure. What you'll notice as well is that the rings are round. They are not U-shaped. So when you open the ring, you evenly distribute the stress over the entire circumference of the ring, and it's not concentrated in one area. Then on our little prongs or our little legs, you'll notice there's a little space. So the benefit is that these 4 prongs now articulate independent of each other, so as to provide you with superior tooth seal and separation, but the angles are designed to match the tooth morphology so as to provide you with a superior gingival marginal seal and also to prevent ring pop-off. Now, we also purposely made these prongs a little longer, meaning that if you have a clinical situation where you're missing a cusp on a class 2, there's less chance of the ring collapsing into the embrasure area. And this is one of the reasons why Garrison developed a 3rd ring in their system called the wide prep ring. It was an additional ring to address these clinical challenges. And again, you have the issue of increased costs because you have to now have an additional ring. Then to address the issue with composite or adhesive from sticking to the resin part of the ring, we use a material called Delrin. Delrin is a polyoxymethylene. It's used in mechanical gears. And the benefit is it contains a natural lubricant. So as a result, it lowers the surface tension to prevent composite or adhesive from sticking to the ring. Now, in terms of cleaning and disinfecting these rings, we certainly do not recommend that you place them in either a cold sterilant or an ultrasonic cleaner. The reason being is those chemicals are very harsh, and what they'll do is they'll cause that resin to prematurely dry out and cause the resin part to crack. So what we recommend is rinse them off underwater. If you do want to place them in an ultrasonic cleaner, we would recommend that you place them in a beaker in water, but they can go into a washer disinfector. They can go through an autoclave. Now, typically, if you're asking about number of cycles, I would say typically with a Garrison ring, they would recommend about 300 cycles. A Paladin ring, they recommend about 700. With our rings, we can get as many as 1,000 cycles through an autoclave. So a little bit more durable as well. Now, these rings can be stacked very easily. You can butterfly them. The green ring is our molar ring. The orange ring is our premolar ring. Now, these rings are designed to stand up a little bit more than our competitors. What we did is we made these with a 20-degree profile so that if you do have a rubber dam clamp in place, there is never, ever an issue with seating of the ring. So these are designed to stand up a little bit more. So if you're not familiar with the ring, if you haven't used it, and when the first time you use it, you might say, oh, I don't feel that this ring is seated properly. What we always recommend you do is once you have seated the ring, is you take both your thumbs and you press down on the resin part only of the ring to make sure that the ring is fully seated. Now, and sometimes you can have clinical situations where you've got very short teeth or highly tapered teeth. What we recommend you do for those clinical cases is you take one of the rings and with a little diamond disc, you cut those prongs just a little bit shorter, maybe take off about 1 millimeter or 1.5 millimeters, and then take a a polishing disc and just kind of smooth those surfaces up and just keep it for those clinical situations. So we believe in taking care of all the finer details. So what we also did with our forceps is we made them a little bit more robust. Our forceps are the ones in the upper image. You can see that they're a little thicker than the traditional forcep. And then to reduce the frustration during placement or removal of a ring, we didn't put the serration on the entire length of the arm. We just put it on a very, very short part of the arm, because many times this little band, for lack of a better term, tends to get caught up here, and now you're struggling trying to either during the placement or removal of the ring, if you will. Now, also what we did is we developed a very, very unique wedge called the active wedge. So what it has is we made it with a little cutout here. So what happens is when you push this wedge through the embrasure area, that collapses. But once you've gone through, that springs back so as to prevent the wedge from walking out the embrasure area. We made the contour such that you're going to seal the matrix band better on the lingual aspect of the restoration. We have this little area, which is very nice if you're using, say, a hemostat or locking tweezer for placement and removal. The tip is at a 45-degree angle, so when you insert this wedge, it's almost like a suture analogy, so as to prevent any damage to the interdental papilla. And then how are we able to provide 2 pounds of separation force? Is the spine here on the underside of the wedge is reinforced with resin, and hence the reason we're able to provide 2 pounds or 0.91 kgs of separation force. So here you can see when we push the wedge through the embrasure area, how that tip collapses. But once it's passed through, how it springs back. But because of the contour of the wedge, you're going to get a better seal of your matrix band on the lingual aspect of the restoration. Now, we also know that on occasions you'll have a deep class 2 and you've got an indentation on the root surface. And after you've placed your wedge, you still have this space. And either you trying to place another wedge, or you're taking plumber's tape or cotton pellet or Teflon tape to try to fill that space. So what we developed is a little wedge called a deep seal wedge. And essentially what we did on this wedge is we just put, for lack of a better term, a little hip on the wedge, if you will. So when you look from a clinical perspective, you can see how that little hip now will provide a superior seal of the matrix band at the gingival margin. We only made this hip on one side of the wedge. The reason being is the tooling to make this wedge was $80,000. So sometimes, depending on the clinical situation, you might have to come from the buccal aspect, or you might have to come from the lingual aspect. Then we also looked at the matrix bands, and we said, how can we improve what's currently out there? Well, we know the challenge with most matrix bands being 38 to 40 microns is many times if you have a tight contact on placement, the bands would deform very easily. So what we did is we used the same thickness, but we incorporated heat during the manufacturing process. So these bands actually are stiffer, but they are the same thickness. Also, what we did is we made them with what we refer to as an ultra wrap feature. So these bands tend to hug the anatomy better, which means that you have less frustration when trying to seat your ring. You don't necessarily always have to have your fingers there to hold the band against the tooth so that you can seat the ring, if you will. So we made these with an ideal proximal contour. So what you will also find with these bands is there's less need to have to burnish the band to provide the ideal contact, if you will. And then we made it with a curved marginal ridge. We made these tabs much, much smaller so that you can certainly minimize the finishing time on the occlusal aspect of the restoration. And then, of course, these come in 3 sizes, 4.5, 5.5, and 6.5. That 6.5 especially has got more of a pronounced subgingival collar. So especially for those deep class 2s, you're going to make sure that you're going to get a nice seal at the gingival margin, if you will. So here you can see with the matrix band and the wedge in place, how it's sealing the restoration well past the proximal line angles. And then what we did is, because of the patent, and we respect patents, we weren't able to put little holes in the matrix bands, but what we developed was a little punch pliers, which allowed you to punch your own hole. It was very nice, especially for retrieval, because what it allowed you to do is it allowed you to engage more of the band so as to prevent the band from tearing when you're removing the band. However, comments from our customers were, yeah, we still find that this is kind of quite time consuming and frustrating. So what we've developed is a special little matrix forceps. Now, these are really small, and I'll show you when I switch the camera. But what's unique about these is they have the ideal angulation, which makes for very, very easy placement or retrieval of the little matrix bands, if you will. So there's numerous ways that you can get into the system. We have what's referred to as a complete kit, which comes with the instruments as well as the rings, the wedges, and the matrix bands. But if you have your own instruments, we have a starter kit which just comes with the rings, the wedges, and the bands. This system is certainly interchangeable with any of the other systems out there. So if you feel that you just wanted to start with the rings, or if you want to start with the wedges, or you want to start with the bands, you can use these with the Garrison or the Trident system. The only thing we do not recommend is using the Garrison forceps on our rings. We've only ever had one ring where the metal is broken, and that's because they use the Garrison forceps, because with the Garrison forceps, is you require a lot more force to open the ring, if you will. So I'm just going to quickly show you two clinical cases, and then what we'll do is I'll flip cameras, and then if there's any questions at the end, I'll happily entertain any questions. So here we can see a pre-op of a large class 2 that requires to be replaced. Of course, we're always going to place the matrix band first, then the wedge. So as I say, you can place the wedge either from the buccal or the lingual, depending on the clinical situation. And then the ring is designed to sit on top of that wedge. And typically, the other systems recommend you sort of come with a rocking motion. With our system, we just recommend you come in at 90 degrees, and then, as I alluded to earlier, with your thumbs, is just press down on the resin part of the ring only to make sure that that ring is fully seated. But you can see how it is sealed the restoration well past the proximal line angles. Because of the natural contour of this band, there's virtually no need to burnish the band. And you also get a very, very nice, you can see a very, very nice vertical seal here. And then you're going to go ahead, etch, apply your adhesive, and then build up with your, different layers of composite, either a flowable as your initial layer, followed by your paste-like composites. And then, remove the band. So you can see when I remove the band, there's virtually very little occlusal adjustment that needs to be done. And then we're going to go ahead. What we recommend in the polishing step would be something like our ASAP, all surface access polishers. This is the little purple pre-polisher, which is designed just to kind of refine and smooth, being used with light pressure, just remove any surface defects. And you can do this in about 30 seconds or less. And you can see that surface is now being prepared for the final high shine. And then following the high shine with our high shine polishes, this is a kind of result you can receive in about 30 seconds or less. But you can see you've got a nice, broad, tight contact, no issues with food impaction, no issues with tooth dislodgement or rotation, or, defective occlusal contacts. And then this is just a little premolar. Again, here we use the punch pliers for placement, folding that little tab over, holding it in place. But here you can see how that little tip of this wedge compresses as you push it through the embrasure. But once it's gone through, how it springs back. Here we're using the premolar ring. And again, just dropping it in on top of the wedge. You can see how that seals the matrix well past the proximal line angles. You get a nice vertical seal as well. And then going in and placing your flowable or paste-like composites. And then here they've used the punch pliers for retrieval. Just going through the polishing step, and there's your final result. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch cameras here. Oh, hang on, I just want to, Just give me 1 second. Just go back here. So as I alluded to earlier, your biggest expense is time, and really our goal, the philosophy of our company is teaching better dentistry, and our goal is to assist you in reducing your treatment times, increasing your efficiency, and ultimately increasing your practice profitability. Because at the end of the day, you provide a service to the community, but you need to be profitable, if you will. And when you're selecting your products, especially post-COVID, I reached out to a number of our leading key opinion leaders we work with, and I said, what are kind of the 3 things you're looking for, especially now, post-COVID, when you're selecting your materials? And they said, well, Peter, first of all, we want quality materials. We want materials that are going to be consistent, and we know that every time we use them, we're going to get the same result, and we want something that is predictable. So we know that when we use this material, it's going to give us the results we require. Because, for you to have patients come back to redo work, it becomes very expensive. Here in the US, just to put a patient in the chair with disposals and wipes is about $22. So, it's about providing solutions to help you reduce those issues from happening. Right, so now I want to go to the camera, right? I just click on the camera. Okay, so can everybody see this screen now? Sharon?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I just wanted to show you, and wanted to show you the Garrison rings. And I'm not, folks, the goal here is not to talk negatively with it. It's just merely to point out the differences. So you can see the Garrison ring. This is the Garrison forceps. But because these, as I say, are stainless steel, it requires a lot more force, about 37% more hand force to open these rings. And as I say, they all tend to lose, you tend to lose the resiliency in these rings very quickly. The other thing that I want to bring your attention to is you'll notice the profile of these rings. Let's move that out of the way. The profile of these rings is very, very low. So you're going to have issues when you're trying to seat if you've got a rubber dam clamp in place. And then you can see here, this is this hard plastic spine that I'm referring to. And then you've got this softer resin here. So on occasion, this hard spine can tend to deform the matrix band, but you also have the issue with composite adhesive sticking to this. So certainly the Trident or the Paladin ring was a step in the right direction because of the change from stainless steel to nickel titanium. But you can see the shape of this. This is U-shaped. So every time you open the ring, you create stress. So if I open the ring here like this, I'm just gonna refocus. Every time you open the ring, you create stress right there. Okay, and then also the profile of this ring is fairly low. So the issue with rubber dam clamp and placement, and then this is all single piece construction. So as I say, sometimes it adapts well to the lingual surface of the restoration, but doesn't adapt so well to the buccal surface. And then in terms of retention in these rings is in the forceps. You can see there's these little slots. And so what you do is you just put the ring in like that and then squeeze it for about 45 seconds to a minute. And that's one way you can retention these rings, if you will. So here's the dual force ring. So as I say, you can see the rings are round, but this is the couple of things I want to point out to you is, let me just refocus here. As you can see this slot here, the reason why we put this slot in is it allows these 4 prongs to articulate independent of each other. And that's going to provide you with superior tooth seal and separation. And then because we made these prongs a little longer, what I want to show you here is you can see here, we're missing a cusp on a class 2, but because the prongs are a little longer, it's still going to be able to engage the root of the tooth without collapsing into the embrasure area. And then with that 20-degree profile, is if we do have a rubber dam clamp in place, there's no issue when it comes to seating of the ring. Then in terms of the wedges, where's my... Wait 1 second here. So this would be the tread end or the pallet end wedge. It's not a bad wedge, but again, you see there's nothing here that's providing. This is the underside of the wedge. There's nothing there that's going to provide any separation force. It's a very, very smooth wedge, smooth plastic. So as I say, on occasion, sometimes this can back out of the embrasure area. And then the contour is not great, so it's not going to provide a really good seal on the lingual aspect of the restoration. So this was certainly to address the wedges from walking out. This little wedge from Garrison was certainly a step in the right direction. But as I alluded to, these little plastic fingers are so flimsy that they're not going to provide any separation, seal the matrix band well on the lingual aspect. These are kind of, all of these wedges are pretty much triangular in shape, whereas when you look at the our active wedge, you can see it's sort of got more of a seagull wing profile, if you will. So you can see that tip is at a 45-degree angle. So when you insert it, it's a suture analogy, so as to prevent damage to the interdental papilla. And then this, as I say, we made it with that little cutout, so that collapses when you pass it through the embrasure, but once it's gone through, it springs back. And then when we flip the wedge over, this is the area that I want to highlight here, and that's what's reinforced with resin, which gives the ability for the wedge to provide 2 pounds of separation force. And then looking at the deep seal wedge, you can see we've added this little bubble right here, this little hip, if you will, and that's what gives the ability in those deep class 2s where you've got the indentation on the root surface for the wedge to adequately seal the matrix band at the gingival margin. Then in terms of the matrix bands, this is the palate end matrix band. Again, you can see it doesn't really hug the tooth very well. So many times during a placement, what you have to do is you have to have somebody hold, with their fingers hold the band so that you can seat the ring. And then the issue, not so much during placement, but certainly on removal, with these holes right at the edge, is the issue with the band tearing. So that's why they went to these little matrix bands with the Teflon coating. But if you feel all these bands, you can see how flimsy they are. Very, very flimsy. So when you look, and these would be the slick bands from Garrison. So there's no, again, because they're all the same thickness, they deform very, very easily. Whereas with the Ultra Wrap band, this is the Ultra Wrap band from the Dual Force system, you can see this band is a lot more rigid and it won't deform easily during placement. But also with this Ultra Wrap feature, it tends to hug the anatomy better, so there's less interference when you seat the ring, if you will. So just to go through the placement technique, what I've got here is I'm always going to start with the band first. Now, what I'm going to show you, these are these new little matrix forceps that we've introduced. So, as I say, especially if you're going like a second molar on because of the angulation, is even if the patient's got a restricted bite, allows for very easy access for placement or removal of the matrix band. So what we're going to do is I've got a tooth class 2. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more here. So as I said, we're going to place the matrix band first. And then what we always want to do is just fold that little tab over on the adjacent tooth and then come in with our wedge. And say using that suture analogy, push it through and then But now what you can see here is how the wedge has reopened. So it's going to seal the matrix band well past the proximal line angles, and then the ring is, we come in at that 90-degree angle. As I say, it's designed to sit on top of the wedge. And then always, always, always just taking our thumbs and pressing down to make sure that that's seated properly and it's not going to pop off. But you can see here, let's refocus this for you. There's virtually no need to have to burnish that band, and how well it is sealing past or beyond the proximal line angles of the restoration. Okay, I mean, I know this is on a model, and so I don't have a periodontal ligament that's going to give me a little bit more flexibility of movement, if you will, but just kind of see what's over. Now, what we have developed, many times when you've done a class 2 restoration and now you remove a matrix band and you've got interproximal composite or adhesive flash, typically what folks have used is they use something like, I'm just going to zoom out here for a little bit, is they've used something like a number 12 scalpel. But there's always the issue of access, angulation, and then there's always the risk of you slipping and cutting the interdental papilla and initiate bleeding. So people have used polishing strips, they've used their ultrasonics, they've used a fine diamond, and those, again, you get the same issue with access and angulation. So what we did develop is a very, very unique little instrument called a composite ninja. What you'll notice about this is, number one, how narrow, let's move that out the way for a second, how narrow these blades are. And now these blades are sharp on the top and the bottom, but not sharp that they're going to cut tissue. But we made it with the multiple angulation. So what that allows for is, it allows for very easy access into those embrasure areas, and so you can go in and cleave off that excess composite or adhesive, or if you've cemented a temporary or permanent crown and now you want to remove that into that cement, that excess cement in the interproximal area, allows you to do that very easily. Also, what we did is we made the tip, I'll just see if I can focus on this a little bit better, is we made the tip rounded. So what that allows you to do very easily is it allows you to go with this instrument subgingivally, and so as to go and remove any excess cement without damaging the interdental papilla, if you will. And it's also quite versatile as an instrument because, especially for composite placement on anterior teeth, allows you very easy to blend the composite into the restoration, if you will. These are extremely lightweight. The reason why we made them very lightweight is that even with a gloved hand, it's going to give you superior tactile feel for either for composite placement or removal of excess composite or adhesive. So that's about. How do I get back to just the regular screen? Okay. And then, okay, so that's about as all that I have to share with you. I don't know if there's any questions. I'd be happy to entertain any questions if there are, Sharon.
Sorry, Peter, I'm just having a sip here.
Sure.
Let's see. Does the deep seal wedge come with a starter kit?
The deep seal, yeah, all the wedges will be included in the starter kit. I think you get about 20 of each size, and there's 5 different sizes. So small, medium, large, extra large, and then deep seal. They're all color coded according to size. But they can be purchased individually in little refill packs of 100, or there is just, you can get a wedge intro kit, which I think has 200 wedges, and there's 40 of each size in that kit.
Yes. So we will be emailing our special flyer with regards to all the dual force components, all the delegates at the end of the webinar. And we will also be contacting all the delegates individually tomorrow through the call center. Just have a look here. No clinical questions. So you must have covered everything. Thanks, Peter.
It's certainly my pleasure, and I appreciate you folks giving up your evening to listen to me. I hope the information I shared with you has been helpful. And as you know, as I alluded to, we're not the only company that makes good products. And you know, if there's certain parts of the system that you think would be beneficial to you, then you know you certainly know how to obtain them. So many thanks, and I look forward to next week, where I'll be speaking on how we can, very easy for the folks that are still doing a lot of impression material taking, how we can help you not only reduce the impression material cost by up to 30% a year, but also how we can provide you with more dimensionally stable, distortion-free impressions. So I look forward to that. You know, if you've got a spare hour next week, I encourage you to log on, and we will keep it as entertaining as possible.
Thank you, Peter. I have added my email address in the chat box. If any of you have any additional questions, I actually was so busy introducing Peter, I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Sharon Heighton. I'm based at the Johannesburg offices. I'm the consumable sales manager in Johannesburg, but I'm also the national brand manager for Clinicians Choice. So I'll gladly assist should you have any questions. Have a great evening, and once again, thanks for taking the time to join us this evening, and hopefully we see you all on the 16th of September when we have our next session with regards to Clinicians Choice webinars. Thanks very much and good evening.